Hey guys, we're going to take a look at Emerson's Society and Solitude, and I thought it might be helpful for us to do kind of a close read. This is kind of a tough essay, so I figured we could take a look at it together. So I'm going to read, and I've made some annotations. I'm just going to read and highlight and talk about my annotations. We're going to see if we can identify his argument and the examples that he uses to support his argument, and then also think a little bit about some counter arguments. Counter arguments would be reasons against his overall argument. So let's see what we can find. All right, so he begins with the necessity of solitude is deeper than we have said and is organic. I have seen many a philosopher whose world is large enough for only one person. He acts or affects to be a good companion, but we are still surprising his secret, that he means and needs to impose his system on all the rest. The determination of each is from all the others, like that of each tree up into free space. 'Tis no wonder, when each has his whole head, our society should seem so small. Like President Tyler, our party falls from us every day, and we must ride in a sulky at last. Dear heart, take it sadly home to thee. There is no cooperation. We began with friendships, and all our youth is a reconnoitering and recruiting of the holy fraternity they shall combine for the salvation of men. But so the remoter stars seem a nebula of united light, yet there is no group which a telescope will not resolve, and the dearest friends are separated by impassable gulfs. The cooperation is involuntary and is put upon us by the genius of life, who reserves this as part of his prerogative. It's fine for us to talk. We sit and muse and are serene and complete. But the moment we meet with anybody, each becomes a fraction. So in this, he talks a little bit about some of the challenges of friendship and contemplates whether we are naturally meant to be in society or with others, or are we naturally meant to be alone? And it seems to me that he is in favor of solitude because he says that is our natural state. And he talks about this philosopher who, to me, the philosopher sounds a little egotistical. This philosopher feels like the world is only big enough for him, and he acts like a good friend, but his friends learn that he really just wants his own way. He wants to impose the system on all the rest. And this is a risk that you take with society, with friendship. Sometimes you don't know who's going to be a good friend when you first meet them. So he goes on to say that he talks about how we have our whole head, which sounds kind of weird, but we have our whole minds to kind of exist in. And sometimes, when compared to our imagination, society can seem kind of small. He talks about President Tyler, who pushed all of his pushed people in his party away and then pushed people in the other party away. Sometimes we have a tendency to push others away and end up alone. Um, and he talks about how, as children, we have these friendships, and as we grow older, we try to regain that childhood kind of friendship that we have. But again, he's listing all of these challenges of friendship and being in society. It's not, from his perspective, not always easy. And he feels like he can be serene and complete all by himself. And that sometimes when we try to make friendships with people, those people can kind of divide into cliques, and sometimes it can be a little divisive. Drama, right? So he knows that drama happens, and he doesn't like the drama. He goes on to say that this doesn't mean that we're not fit for society. He says, it by no means follows that we are not fit for society because soirees or parties are tedious and because parties find us tedious. So he's not arguing that we're unfit for society because we don't like to go to parties. He feels like there's more to it than that. And he uses this example of a backwoodsman. So we're going to highlight this. This backwoodsman, which means this is a man who grew up in the country. He says, a backwoodsman who had been sent to university told me that when he heard the best bred young men at the law school talk together, he reckoned himself a bore. But whenever he caught them apart and had one to himself alone, then they were the bores and he the better man. And if we recall the rare hours when we encountered the best persons, we then found ourselves, and then first society seemed to exist. That was society, though in the transom of a brig or on the Florida Keys. And we don't have all of this here, so I don't really know exactly where he's going with this one because you see this is an excerpt and this thought isn't finished. But what we do know is that he talks about this man who went to college, and when he heard all of the well-educated, kind of wealthy college students around him, he thought of himself as being kind of uneducated. But when he spoke to these other people one-on-one, he realized that he wasn't uneducated, and he began to feel like the other people were the ones who maybe weren't. Maybe not as smart as he was. And so he emphasizes how oftentimes our best conversations, our best friendships, and this is what he means by society, forms when it's just one person talking to one person. Again, another challenge of being in society. So our first challenge was that sometimes people don't have our best interests at heart and really just want to achieve their own goals. And then his second example, arguing for why solitude is better than society, he uses this example of getting to know people one-on-one as being a much better way of learning about a person and learning about yourself. So moving on, but the people are to be taken in very small doses. If solitude is proud, so is society vulgar. And so this is kind of his central idea here in some ways. If solitude is proud, society is vulgar. And so he argues that it's good to be kind of on your own. He is very much in favor of individualism, and that when you get in society, sometimes society can seem really uncivilized. It makes me think about social media, and if you talk to somebody who doesn't agree with you face to face, one-on-one, then that person is much more likely to have a civil conversation with you. But if you get people in a crowd, or you get people in a situation where they're not talking to you face to face, it can go downhill really quickly. In society, high advantages are set down to the individual as disqualifications. We sink as easily as we rise through sympathy. So many men whom I know are degraded by their sympathies, their native aims being high enough, but the relation all too tender to the gross people around them. Men cannot afford to live together on their merits, and they adjust themselves by their demerits. by their love of gossip or sheer tolerance and animal good nature. They untune and dissipate the brave aspirant. So remember that he is very much in favor of individualism. And he believes, as we saw in nature, that when you get with society, that takes something away from your individualism. And it's kind of like that idea of choose your friends carefully because you become like your friends. And this is the warning that he gives here. You become like your friends in that you begin to fall for things like gossip, or you become too tolerant and good natured so that you don't stand up for the things that you believe in anymore. Or you become too much like the people around you and it takes away from your individualism. So we have a little summary here from Ingenuity. So the editor interjects in this paragraph you've just read. Emerson suggests that too much time spent in society can corrupt the individual, and individuals who are not careful can sink into society. And this encourages us to take a minute to think about what that means to you. And so, one of the counter arguments that I thought of against what Emerson is saying is the idea that you don't really have to become like the people around you. And then, likewise, it seems like, especially here, he's criticizing people for being too judgmental. When he talks about that backwoodsman, he sounds like he's being critical of people for being judgmental, for being kind of snobby. But then we see him kind of being very judgmental of society here. So those would be my two big counter arguments at this point. Okay, so he's presented this problem. It's challenging to make friends. It's challenging to know that when someone has your best interest at heart. It is better to get to know people one-on-one. And sometimes when you're in society, you tend to take on the worst traits of the people that you spend time around. And so, very much in favor of solitude versus society here. So, let's see what he has to say as kind of a solution. He goes on to say the remedy is to reinforce each of these moods from the other. Conversation will not corrupt us if we come to the assembly in our own garb and speech and with the energy of health to select what is ours and reject what is not. So I think about my counter argument here. You don't have to become like the people around you. It's kind of what he's saying here. That conversation won't corrupt us or change us if we are ourselves. Society we must have. That right here, remember he said, the necessity of solitude is deeper than we have said and is organic, so solitude is necessary. But then he says here, society we must have. So he acknowledges that it doesn't make sense. It's not really possible for people to be alone all the time. So if we must have society, let it be true society and not just being around people. He goes on to say, is it society to sit in one of your chairs? I cannot go to the houses of my nearest relatives because I do not wish to be alone. We saw in nature that he does like to use a paradox. How can you be alone when you're with others? Well, if there's no connection with that person that you're spending time with, it's kind of like you're being alone. There are plenty of times where you feel kind of lonely, even though you have other people around you, but they're not the people that you have a connection with. And I think that's probably something that might resonate with you right now. You may have family all around you all the time, but you really miss your friends because we haven't been in school since March. And so You have that connection with your friends that you don't really have with your family. So even though you have people around you all the time, it's possible to still feel lonely. So I kind of get what he's saying here. All right, so simply being around others is not society. You have to experience a connection. So put any group of people together with freedom for conversation, and a rapid self-distribution takes place into sets and pairs. The best are accused of exclusiveness. It would be more true to say that they separate as oil from water, as children from old people, without love or hatred in the matter, each seeking his like. And any interference with affinities would produce constraint suffocation. All conversation is a magnetic experiment. So when we are around people, if you go to a room full of people, you're going to be drawn to somebody who you feel like you have something in common with. And it's natural, he says. It's like magnets. People who have things in common are drawn to each other. And to try and fight against that and force people to be around others that make them uncomfortable is not natural. Now, counter argument. Here we have this idea of kind of a thought vacuum, which we kind of hear another social media example. If you only spend time with people who are exactly like you, how are you ever going to learn and grow? So spending time with people who are exactly like you makes it hard to learn and grow. Now, Emerson might argue that everything that you need to know is in your head, but I would argue that it's really fruitful to hear the opinions of other people. So he goes on to say, a higher civility will reestablish in our customs a certain reverence which we have lost. If we are, here we have that idea of being civil again. Be kind and respectful of each other. What to do with these brisk young men who break through all fences and make themselves at home in every house? I find out in an instant if my companion does not want me, and ropes cannot hold me when my welcome is gone. One would think that the affinities would pronounce themselves with a sure reciprocity. So again, this is not the end of the essay, so we don't know what comes after this. So we don't get to see a conclusion here. It's like another body paragraph without a conclusion. And he's just talking about people who kind of barge in and don't really read the room and pay attention to what other people think about them. And he's just basically saying that if I try to spend time with someone and they don't want me around, I am leaving. I'm not going to be around. So, just to kind of sympathize, just to kind of summarize here, we get the idea, just to kind of draw it together, because I've been talking for about 18 minutes now. So trying to fit in where you don't naturally belong, according to Emerson, is not really worth it. It's better to be alone from his perspective than to try and fit in where you don't. Again, I would use that same counter argument that, meeting new people and hearing new ideas is how you learn and grow. But Emerson would argue that society is not natural for people, and that, in fact, solitude is what is natural for people. So when you write your paragraph for this, for your central idea, this is the example that I posted for nature. Remember, you have a central idea right here. So your central idea could be, Emerson argues that solitude is natural for people. And then try and think about maybe a detail from the beginning of the essay, from the middle of the essay, and from the end of the essay, in which he explains why solitude is more natural for people than society. Think about the things that he says about how sometimes people are only in it for themselves. We see that in this paragraph. Think about how sometimes when we're in society, we're judged for the wrong things. Maybe you're from the country, you've got that thick country accent, and people might judge you because you have that thick country accent and you like to go hunting and you like to be out in the woods. But in fact, you are secretly a genius and they just don't know it. You could think about how society changes you, how being around others can corrupt us or change us. So these are just some things to consider. He even says society is okay if you're with people with whom you experience a connection. This might actually work as a really good counterargument because he argues against his own argument right here. So in your assignment, you have to, let's see, in writing about this, you have to write a paragraph in which you identify the central idea and then at least 4 sentences containing key details to support that central idea. You have an example here that you can use. Let me know if you have any questions or issues or problems with that, and we'll troubleshoot them together.